this discussion of this Hindu group that's establishing itself in the U.S. And it reminds me of many of the stories we've talked about coming out of India. We've talked about the conflicts there where Hindu nationalism has a deep religious aspect as well. So even if you are ethnically Indian in whatever way, if you are practicing the Catholic faith, if you are a Christian, you are coming under fire from these Hindu nationalists because there is a deep, deep religious aspect to it here. And now Zeal is reporting that this Indian Hindu group is expanding their efforts in the U.S. And I got to say, I've seen several pictures going around, video clips on social media of some of these Hindu temples that are getting built around the U.S. And man, it just,
Texas.
It just, like, I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't freak me out in that way, but it certainly gets my hackles up. Let's use that phrase, because to see these Hindu structures going up in the United States, it's so, I don't know, antithetical to whether you're talking about it from a secular attitude of our identity as a nation, or just from especially from a Catholic perspective, to see these pagan temples being built throughout. I think a lot of people are upset about it, and more people should be aware that this is going on and this is increasing throughout the U.S.
Yeah, I don't think we tend to think of Indians, I guess, and especially Hindus in like a violent way.
No.
But we're talking about specifically a paramilitary organization in this particular case. And that's kind of fascinating to me, that there are paramilitary Indian and Hindu organizations, but that's what we're talking about. And we've covered, as you said, over the past several weeks, these stories, maybe this last several months actually, stories of persecution happening over in India, specifically targeting Christian and especially Catholic structures, and really trying to demolish them, trying to prevent worship, trying to outright persecute those individuals. And so when you sort of cross-reference what's happening over there in India with what's happening here in America in terms of their rise, it's actually really concerning. And that's what we're talking about here. And then you have to go back, forgive me for nerding out a little bit, but Tertullian, writing in the early church, was writing to an emperor who was persecuting the early Christians, right? The early faithful. And he's writing to this very evil pagan. And it's really interesting to see what kind of argument he makes. And the argument he makes is, well, the reason you shouldn't persecute us is because we're worshiping the true God, whereas your people are worshiping demons. And therefore, they're bringing down hell upon your society. And that was a fascinating argument to say that because, you're these pagan sort of polytheistic worshippers of worshipping false gods, that it actually harms your society.
Yeah.
The reason that I'm nerding out and mentioning this right now is because, well, what happens when you bring a bunch of Hindu people into the United States and they set up their own areas of worship and their own temples? Does that have an effect on the greater American society? Does that have an effect? And I think Tertullian would say yes. Yeah. And I think there's an argument to be made. Spiritual warfare is a thing. All of our souls are being contested for on the national level. When we use phrases like "in God we trust," right? This is, foundationally speaking, a Christian society, even if it's not an exclusively Catholic one historically. I grant that, but still, at least you're like you are worshiping, the true God, right? Regardless. Yeah. But when you have, Hindu nationalists there engaged in their own distorted worship, not aimed at the true God, but aimed elsewhere, I don't know. I'm going to say that I think that's actually going to carry with it some consequences. I
would think so, too. And I think it goes hand in hand with other errors spread by a secularist understanding of the freedom of religion. You're going to have all these other problems coming along, and now, so there's no objection to be had from that point of view to bringing in these Hindu nationalists to expand their efforts in the U.S. Some details about this, by the way, is that this is not just people coming in and building temples. They are trying to have a political effect. So in January of last year, the RSS. I'm not going to try and pronounce the full Indian name of this, but it's called the RSS. This is the Hindu Nationalist Organization, and again, they're known to be ideologically sort of the father of the ruling party in India that is causing so many troubles for Christians in many ways. So the RSS has hired a prominent Washington lobbying firm for work related to U.S.-India bilateral relations and outreach to U.S. officials, and the firm received quite a lot of money. They eventually terminated the contract because they were questioning whether this should have been registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And they were also working with Pakistan for certain lobbying efforts. But basically, the group that the firm that they hired said, this is going a little far. Maybe we need to terminate this contract. So it's already being concerning for these lobbying groups. And then they're also trying to apparently cultivate ties in the Trump administration. There are some Indian origin officials in senior positions there. And again, there hasn't seemed to be any public effect on that front, but they are making efforts to build connections there. So they're trying to have a political influence in addition to the social influence of these gatherings of volunteers, all of these local branches throughout the U.S. And it says that the group ran well over 250 local gatherings across 33 states. Right. I mean, that's a pretty big presence already.
That's not a small thing. That's as big as the SPLC. I'm just kidding.
There you go. There you go. Well, you never know what they might be funding. I know we've got one of the big problems on social media is the amount of accounts that pretend to be Western in origin and are actually coming from India, sometimes Pakistan as well, but especially based in India and presenting themselves as Americans,
so
usually anonymous and things like that. But
Jay, like you get into a discussion with what you think is somebody here in the United States debating a big moral issue, especially because I don't really debate on sort of pure politics issues anymore. But on these moral issues, and then you think you're kind of getting into it, and then suddenly you go to their profile page and you click on that new button, that new option that's available on X that tells you where the account even is based, and it's like, oh, I'm just talking to somebody who's in India. And then you realize how sort of, I don't know, futile and artificial this entire exchange is.
It has no point.
And so much of social media is that. You're not even talking with your neighbor. You think you are, and that's why it's artificially social.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of issues there. That'd be a long topic to get into. But keeping it on the topic of Hindu presence in America, again, it's something to not just be aware of, but to pray that we come up with a good solution for it, because this has nothing to do with whether it's someone from India. I know some good Catholics who had origins in India, and of course we have our Christian brothers and sisters in India who are suffering under Hindu nationalism. So the primary problem here is the religious aspect and the paramilitary part of the religious aspect to it, and it's something to educate yourself about. There's that old liberal canard about how the more educated you are, the more tolerant you'll be, or something like that. Well, I'll tell you, all I took was one class on sort of not quite comparative world religions, but it was on a couple of a few different Eastern religions, including Hinduism. I took a course on that in college. I came out of that course horrified by some of the details of the practice of Hinduism in India, and I'll come off as a Western chauvinist as much as I want here to say that Hinduism is not a good religion. I'll say it right out. It's not something that you can have coexistence with in the way that, let's say, Catholics and Christians can coexist, and Protestant Christians can coexist here in the United States, in the way that you can even have, certain amount of coexistence, so to speak, with non-Christian religions that are what's the word, Abrahamic in origin or whatever like that, if you want to talk about Islam, Judaism, such like that. In fact, many early church fathers thought of Islam basically just as a weird Christian heresy. That's this weird Arianist kind of origin heresy. I was
going to say it is a Christological heresy, but it also has a bunch of other stuff kind of labeled on top of it. But
but the point is that there's a whole extra level.
So deviant.
Yes, there's a whole extra level to Hinduism.
From that.
Yes. So again, nothing against obviously our Indian Christian brothers and sisters. Do pray for them, especially the ones being persecuted in India. But one way to maybe help them out is to prevent this from getting a foothold here in the U.S. So.